Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 11 of the Near Memo, where we talk about the intersection of search, social media, commerce, and how it ties into local. And joining me, as always, are David Mim and Mike Blumenthal. I'm Greg Sterling. And we've got another exciting discussion for you today, starting with David.
I'm not sure which one of us was more surprised that we're on episode 11, but we have made it this far. So pat on the back.
And as a note for me, it's a highlight of my week getting to talk to you guys.
That is great. And I also enjoy it very much. The highlight of my week is going to sleep on Friday night.
Ordinarily, I'd say that's true, but
this is a very close number 2.
Okay, very good. All right, so we'll get right into the content. No more messing around. So Greg, you highlighted this week the Facebook Small Business Survey that came out, I believe, Wednesday of this week. Basically, a pretty representative cross section of small businesses in America. I was surprised it skewed actually more towards established businesses, which you wouldn't necessarily think of as being particularly active on Facebook relative to newer startups. But it looked at a very wide range of SMBs, and there were a number of data points that were fascinating. A couple of them that I wanted to highlight. 35% of businesses a year ago reported 0 sales online. That number in the last 30 days is all the way down to 13%. So that strikes me that means 22% of SMBs adopted some form of e-commerce over the last year, which I think it's sort of another independent validation of that general range of SMBs that's adopted e-commerce in the last year. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. One really fascinating stat, women-led businesses were 5 times as likely to say that the shift to online tools has helped them survive the pandemic, which strikes me as a SMB software product guy. Could be that our best market is actually with women who are more likely to adopt these online tools and more likely to get value out of them that actually helps their business. And then the third data point was sort of less encouraging, less positive, that the pandemic is clearly hurting small businesses anyway, who are more likely to be in minority communities at a higher level than in white communities. So there was I think figure 10 I'm looking at on the screen right now. The proportion of small businesses that closed or reported that sales fell by more than 50% was substantially higher in majority minority neighborhoods than in non-minority neighborhoods. So that's that's unfortunate. There's a whole range of reasons: access to capital, sophistication, and access to online tool sets. Historically, probably much harder to ramp up if you haven't had exposure. So all of the digital divide things that you've talked about, Greg, I think probably come into play there. So
the larger community also, I mean, in some of those communities, there was more financial distress than in white communities. So that also plays into demand.
I would just anecdotally, my wife and daughter, friends that sort of exited New York City, they were yoga instructors, dance instructors, physical training instructors. All those women were able to create their own brand online, either with the yoga studio initially, but ultimately by themselves. So there's this unbundling going on of these very talented yoga trainers that my wife now religiously goes to 2 or 3 times a week remotely. She never had access to them before. So it's more than just keeping a business going. It's creating new opportunities and new types of businesses, and where the content is being unbundled from the delivery mechanism to some extent.
Well, this is a very important and interesting point I want to come back to, but I want to mention David's observation about the women-owned businesses. I mean, I think they also suffered. I think the report also talked about them suffering more, but their propensity or their ability to adopt e-commerce more than the male-owned businesses that's really interesting. And I don't think gender has really been a category that SaaS companies have targeted. When they talk about personas or whatever, it's typically, it's not a female centric business unless somehow the seller is selling a product for women or
Right.
something, but just in general SaaS, not typically. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, it sort of corresponds to, in a vague sort of way, corresponds to consumer purchase decision making, which is driven by women in many cases. So especially like big household purchases, very often driven by women. So really interesting observation there. Mike, I your point about the influencers, these individual employees who then became, arguably influencers or created their own brand. I mean, I think that's a really interesting phenomenon. Also problematic because not everybody can succeed, right? I mean, I think it creates freedom for those that are good at it and have success and luck, but not everybody's capable of doing that, and it sort of ties into the Substack issue that I'll be talking about. But let's go to you first, Mike.
Sure. So this week at Near Memo, we published some survey data that we generated, traveling and eating out, or titled Traveling and Eating Out Are What Americans Have Been Missing Most. We created an open-ended survey and we surveyed 500 adults, and they could answer up to with whatever they wanted to the question, when you feel safe and the economy opens up, what are 3 things you plan on doing? And not surprisingly, the top 3 things were travel, dining, indoor dining, and visiting with friends and family. Dining and travel were far ahead of even the third one. But the way the survey was structured, which was open-ended, allowed them to express desires more than what they actually do. Even I'm an example. I certainly have this deeply strong desire to visit friends and family, not just visit, but give them hugs. And first thing I did was went out and got a haircut. So obviously there's a difference in what people say want to do and what they actually end up doing. But I think it's an indicator that there will be a rebound. Now, likewise, though, I'm doing a similar survey where they're grading on a scale of 1 to 7, answering the question, once we reach herd immunity, how comfortable will you be doing everything you did before the pandemic? And as I expected, somewhere in the order of 23, 24% of respondents, or even more, 30%, are still not fully comfortable, even after what is perceived to be the end. So there are going to be headwinds in many of these areas that people want to do. There's still going to be some percentage of people that aren't going to feel comfortable going back. And as such, even industries like restaurants, if the top 10% or 10% of their client base doesn't return, even if there's a boom, it's still going to be a struggle, I guess is the way I take that.
Well, I think it illustrates the need for a kind of hybrid approach, right? I mean, you need to maintain delivery, you need to maintain all the things you were doing, and then also prepare for people to come back.
Which is going to be hard. It's like you got to be good at so many things, right? I think the skill set needed in a restaurant to do one thing is dramatically different than the other. But certainly companies like Target and those guys are getting good at all 3. I agree.
That's right. And there was also, Greg, you covered this in one of our bullets as well in the daily newsletter, the semi-daily newsletter, that consumers intended or not intended, actually did spend a huge chunk of their stimulus checks in March on, some of these retail and other services. So I think that not only is there desire to do this in the future, but we're already seeing the rebound happening. So.
The thing that's really fascinating to me that is a complete paradox, and this was also surfaced in the Facebook study because they did a companion consumer survey, is this kind of buying more online but more interest in local at the same time. I mean, this seems to exist in almost 2 parallel universes, because they've always been talked about as historical zero sum. It's like I'm buying more online, I'm buying less locally, but people, I've heard this again and again and again. People are more and more focused on local, but they still are buying more online. And it's kind of breaking my brain a little bit, I don't think it's attitudes and behavior exactly, but I do think it's an interesting thing that we need to explore some more, I think. All right. And speaking of local, Substack Local, which is Substack, the subscription newsletter platform, announced this week that they were going to give $1 million away to up to 30 people in the form of cash advances to create local newsletters. and they cited several examples on their platform that were apparently doing pretty well. And they're soliciting applications that run through the end of this month, essentially, and then they're going to have a panel of judges assess who to give the money to. And then in addition to the money, you get access to mentors and health insurance and design services and some other stuff. And they're going to take 85% of your money the first year, and then you get to keep most of it, any subscription revenue that you generate after that. So they're going to give you 15%, they'll keep 85%, but they'll give you up to $100,000. I don't know how that math works out, because they're saying 30. They give, 30 million divided by 30 is like 33,000, but they're going to give up to 100,000 to people. So I don't know how that's going to exactly work. But nonetheless, the idea is this going to make any kind of dent or be, restorative of local news? And I think it's great that they're doing this, and I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it. But, there have been so many efforts, Patch most notably, in the past, that have tried to crowdsource local news or create a local news model. And it's been very unsuccessful, because I just think structurally at this point, there's nothing to support local news from an advertiser standpoint.
It's a similar problem to the women creating their own yoga studios online.
Exactly.
How do you get visibility and expand beyond the people that know you? I think it'd be very difficult in most markets, even big markets, to achieve the scale you need to succeed at it.
But unlike yoga, where your audience can be global, the audience for news about a small town in rural Oregon is really pretty limited to just that small town. So exactly. I think to the extent that this succeeds, it will probably do so in markets that are already reasonably well served by alt news weeklies or existing quasi nonprofit journalism outlets. I just don't see that the subscriber base is going to be high enough in a lot of smaller towns that are the true news deserts, which are creating all of these problems for society as a result of the collapse of the news industry. So,
and anecdotally, in our town, which fits your description of a news desert, amongst other things here being a desert, but is that all of the journalists that were at the local paper have long gone on to careers as government PR people or PR people in industry and are no longer in the field. So what remains is a very limited core of what was there before.
Well, this is the challenge with everybody being an independent contractor or trying to be an influencer, is that, in some cases you need some sort of structure behind you and a foundation to do the kinds of things that you're not good at. Not everybody's a born marketer, right? I mean, somebody may be a good writer, a good investigative journalist, but they're not necessarily going to be capable of doing the wide range of things that you need to do in order to succeed as an individual. Making TikTok videos, soliciting, building email lists, and all the stuff that people have to do these days. It's pretty challenging.
That is something where Substack could play an outsized role in, I don't know if they're going to run ads to potential subscribers in a given market or whatever.
But it's not clear. Yeah,
they could and should be in a position to do that if they really want to make a go of this.
Yes, I mean, concept. Ironically, you're right that they become this sort of alternative to the publisher that maybe can provide some of that infrastructure that the individual influencer doesn't have. But I mean, we're now sort of in this kind of influencer society. I mean, they've been sort of poaching these big name journalists and paying them huge amounts of money, and also sort of niche celebrities to publish on Substack. It's been sort of a semi-controversial thing, but people are the people that are trying to maximize their value in the market and trade on their sort of existing celebrity, and everybody else is, I think, it's going to be much more challenging for them if you're not a known commodity. So
I think that's right, and it's there are fewer known commodities in
local news. Yep.
Smaller local news markets, and there are fewer subscribers to those known commodities. So,
well, I also pay for too many subscriptions. I was telling you guys beforehand. I mean, I've got like 6 streaming subscriptions. I've got, multiple LA Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, New York Times, and there's subscription fatigue. I mean, this is we talked about Reuters now moving to a subscription model. All these journalistic publications are migrating away from the advertising model into subscriptions for obvious reasons, because they don't get a lot of great ad revenue, and the consumer can only pay for so many subscriptions, and everybody else is SOL, I think. Although I'm the one who proves that there's never too many subscriptions that I'm willing to pay. I don't even know how many subscriptions I'm paying for at this point.
I think you would fall into the category of the exception that proves the rule. Yeah,
exactly. I just got to rein all this stuff in. So any other things that you want to talk about before we say goodbye? There's a ton of interesting stuff going on. I'm sort of overwhelmed by all the news, but
man, I thought that the story on CNBC this week about the spike in Google Trends for when is the real estate market going to crash. I mean, that's just fascinating, the amount of consumer data that is coming out of Google Trends these days that can be used for all sorts of purposes. I think it's a good reminder for all of us as marketers to start there with our market research.
Well, and people have been saying that for years with search data, right? Search data is predictive of future demand. It's also, indicative of present thinking. I mean, it's pretty product development. I mean, it's an evergreen source of feedback from the market. I mean, what was fascinating to me about that story is that wishful thinking, or is it predictive? Is that people hoping the market is going to crash so they can buy a house? Or is it really, reflective of a bubble that is in fact going to come to pass in the next, 6 months or 3 months or whatever?
That's right.
All right. Now it's time to say goodbye.
Thank you for listening to another episode. Be sure to sign up for the Street Fight Summit session with Greg and myself and Amanda Jordan. And Mike, I think you're also speaking on a different session.
Reputation and reviews.
Yep.
And don't forget to sign up for the 3-time-a-week newsletter at nearmemo.co.
Exactly.
And be sure to give us feedback. We're really taking it seriously. It's very, very, very helpful to us. And once again, thanks for listening. Have a good whenever, fill in the next couple of days after you listen to this. Weekend, Thursday, Friday afternoon, whatever it is. Okay. All right.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.